Showtime Synergy. Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories, the worlds, and the songs that make up an omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And your watchers on this journey are me, Guido. I was trying to think of a dual name for myself, like Jem and Jerica. Garrica, I don't know.
Well, I am the truly outrageous Rob.
Oh, there you go. So I'll be Misfit Guido.
There you go. The bad boy.
She's got such a great name, so
Yes.
I'll just be Possessed.
And before we begin our trip to the 80s, Guido, what's new in our little section of the multiverse?
We have our giveaway just wrapped up, our biggest giveaway, and our best giveaway is on the horizon.
Oh.
If you still want to enter our biggest giveaway, actually, there are a few more days after this episode goes live, and you can get instructions in a prior episode from this summer. And our upcoming best giveaway, by some standards, of signed comics might be today, might not.
Oh.
You'll have to listen to this episode to find out, and keep listening because it's been our summer of giveaways.
And I haven't read the script, so I don't even know if it's today or not.
And even no matter what it says in there, I
That's
might
true.
change it on a whim. Who knows?
Ooh.
We've also been posting about toys on our subject today online, so you should make sure to follow us online, and because you're going to see different stuff than you usually see from today's episode and our link to Jem. And on ways that you can support us, we are just coming due to our annual bill for hosting, and so if you want to be a patron, if you are able to give us even $1 a month on coffee as a patron, please head to dearwatchers.com and click join. We do this because we love it, and it does cost us a chunk of money to do this. Our patrons don't cover the costs, and we are okay with that, but every little bit helps, so please feel free to join on coffee, dearwatchers.com.
And also, we're trying to support all those needy orphans, those foster girls,
The Starlight Kids.
They're all those
Exactly.
Starlight Kids.
We're opening the Starlight Orphanage.
Oh, I feel like we do illegal territory now just saying that. But anyway, if you are joining us for the first time, we have 3 parts of our journey through the multiverse today: origins of the story, exploring multiversity, and pondering possibility. So thank you for joining us on today's journey. And
Yes.
with that, dear watchers, welcome to episode 110, and let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with our travels to today's alternate universe.
Let me play our usual fine but expected transition music.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait. Uh-oh. All right, we're going to stop it there. Though
And
it's so
today, yes, we could listen to it all day, but instead we are going to throw on our best mini holographic projector earrings to find out the answer to the question, what if Jem and the Holograms were heroes in the Hasbro multiverse alongside Micronauts, Transformers, G.I.
What?
Joe, Mask, Magic the Gathering,
Whoa.
Candyland, Inhumanoids, Stretch Armstrong, and others.
Yeah. It's a weird question. This is a wild earth. This is fun because while we were planning this whole episode, you were thinking it was just going to be Jem. And then all of a sudden I realized,
Last minute.
wait a second, there is this grail of a comic, and we'll talk a lot more about why it's a grail. There is this grail of a comic out there. Let's do that. And here we are on this wild earth that appeared once in one extremely rare and hard to find comic, and we will get more into that comic and more into the multiverse. But first, we need some background on Jem. So I'll start us off with Jem the toy. Jem the toy, though they launched together, the TV show and the toy, was created by Hasbro, who was making rock and roll dolls to compete with Mattel's Barbie. Sidebar, this actually led to Barbie and the Rockers. So Jem came first, and Mattel then copied and ended up winning this battle. 1986 was the year of release. They were 12.5 inches, so taller than Barbie and all other fashion dolls at the time. And each doll came with a cassette tape. There were 24 original line doll releases, but there were 60 outfits released. There were 10 play sets released, and they were bright and fashionable. They had all these different colored hairs. The earrings of Jem lit up. So they had really cool stuff. They would release varieties and really fun, weird stuff. And as I said, in the development of the toys, they decided a show needed to be part of the launch. So Rob, tell us the origins of the show.
Yeah, so Hasbro really wanted to develop that cartoon and really follow the same playbook they'd used on G.I. Joe, minus the comic book line. They even hired the same production company and a writer who worked on G.I. Joe. So that cartoon was, of course, based on the dolls by Hasbro. It was produced by Sunbow Productions, which was the company behind the TV shows for G.I. Joe, Transformers, and My Little Pony, and a little company called Marvel Productions. And the main story was developed by the head writer and Joe vet, Christy Marx. Jem began as a mini-series of 15 segments on Super Sunday segments and became so popular it turned into its own TV series.
Yeah, an interesting tidbit. We were just listening to some interviews with Christy Marx, and she said it was constructed to be in between the two boy segments of that
Yes.
show. Of course, gendered marketing at the time in toys. But it had to have like sci-fi and fantasy
Action,
elements
yeah.
so that the boys would not turn off the channel because it was thought that boys controlled the channel in their house. So, funny tidbit about that origin.
Well, some boys like you did not turn the channel, and others didn't either, because that animated series ran from 1985 to 1988. It consisted of 65 episodes. 23 of those were written by Christy Marx, and other writers included Carrie Bates, Marv Wolfman, and Paul Dini, some familiar names there.
Real legends.
The story revolved around the rock bands, their musical adventures, as well as their personal lives, and the genres were romance, drama, action, of course, glamour, and fashion. And the really crazy thing is, throughout this entire series, there are over 150 original songs that were presented in MTV-like music videos.
Yeah, like the show would,
yeah.
for those not familiar, the show would almost, though the song was deeply integral to the plot, there would then be like the MTV band name and song title posted like at the bottom left of the screen when they switched into music video mode. Yeah.
Everything basically looks like a Duran Duran album cover. And speaking of fashion, there was so much fashion on the show. There were nearly 1,000 unique fashion designs. Wow.
And they are some of the coolest looks there are. And I feel like they're so popular right now. They actually remind me a ton of like the Hellfire Gala designs.
Totally.
I feel like those are definitely, all of those creators, especially Russell Dotterman, are definitely inspired by Jem. I have no doubt.
I can totally see that.
So real quick, Jem's history in the comics before we dive into some of these examples. There are, as we've talked about with He-Man and She-Ra, and I don't know if we talked maybe with Thundercats, there's a line of UK comics, which are actually the first run, since she didn't come, the dolls did not come with comics. The first appearance in comics by Jem are by London Editions in 1986, 1987. There are about 15 different issues. It didn't last nearly as long as the He-Man line did, but really cool and hard to find oversized comics as the UK was doing in the 80s. There were German, Holland, Dutch, French, and Italian reprintings of the UK stories. But then Mexico in 1988 actually had original comics telling brand new stories over 11 issues. And that is it for Jem in comics until our multiversal moment in 2011 that we'll get into. And then our third segment, when we'll discuss the 2015 run, which is from IDW and lasts over 40 issues, including miniseries, and until 2017. So we haven't seen Jem in comics for almost 7 years, a long time. And we're going to get into her history in just a moment.
Well, let's talk a bit about our history. And Guido, as you said, you've been posting some Jem toys, but I know you've been buying new ones because I don't think you have a lot of yours. But you had a big background. You were a big Jem fan, right?
Yeah, I was. It's been so fun. I'll say I had started my reappropriation of my fandom of Jem over the last few years, but it was actually the Barbie movie. Really, I loved that movie so much, as I've shared on here, that it just sent me back into what was essentially, I guess, my Barbie. I didn't play with Barbie quite as much. My sisters had Barbies, and I was the youngest by a significant amount, so I would sometimes play with them or use them. But it was Jem that I loved. It was Jem that I watched the TV show of. It was Jem that I wanted all of the dolls of. It was Jem that homophobia prevented my mother from feeling comfortable buying me the dolls of. So I would always play with my best friend across the street, Alex, who had the Jem dolls, and we would mix and match and play with them. And of course, I loved Rio. Rio was not only purple haired and attractive, but he was also Latinx, so he's fun. But I have always loved the show, and I have appreciated revisiting it over the last 20 years since it was released on DVD. I think it's really sophisticated storytelling, and of course, I think we have Christy Marx to thank for that. But I love the action and sci-fi element of it, which is subtle. It's mostly a soap opera, but then when we watch it, I mean, you might have noticed this, and we're going to talk about the TV show more in a moment, but like, it's also like the drama of running a record label, and like they talk a lot about like lawsuits, and so it feels adult, but it's so bright and colorful, and the fashion is amazing, and it does have enough action, and I love Jem. And
probably 100% less cocaine than there actually was in running a record label in the 1980s, though.
I will have to keep watching other episodes, see if there are any even remote
Eric does
allusions
seem a
to
little
it.
coked out at times, so.
Yeah, and I have a feeling the Misfits are into more than cocaine.
Totally.
But,
yes. And I feel like the toys must have been a little bit more acceptable to play with than Barbie, because it is like a rock band, right? It feels like something that a boy could have got a little... You could squeak by, maybe.
They were less dolly, that is for sure. Barbie, at least in my experience of growing up, was always dolly, and Jem, on the other hand, had, as I said, they had 10 play sets, right? So they had vehicles, they had cars, they had places. So I mean, I guess Barbie had all of that too.
Cars.
But there was something that made Jem feel a little edgier. It still didn't make it. They were still clearly girl toys. There's no doubt about that. Even more than She-Ra. I think She-Ra was a girl toy, but living sort of in a boy framework. And Jem was definitely a girl toy. I remember friends that were boys playing with She-Ra and engaging She-Ra, but definitely not Jem, for sure.
Yeah.
I loved Jem, and I've loved rediscovering Jem, and I'll always be a big fan of Jem. You, on the other hand, since you were born after Jem.
Well, there's a lot of properties on this show that we'll talk about, and I'll say, well, I didn't really watch that. I didn't really read that. Jem, I don't think I even had heard of until a few years ago. That's how much
when the live action movie, maybe, or something.
I think it was probably the live action movie, because Thundercats and a lot of these other shows, they did put them into reruns, and I would see them on like Toonami when I would come home from school. But I never remember seeing Jem on TV, and I was too young for the original run. And then, as you said, I was so foreboding to be a boy and play with a lot of these toys. I had no siblings, or female friends even growing up, so I never even saw them around like second hand either. So yeah, it was probably not until the movie that I heard about it, and then really meeting you and you introducing me to some of the episodes and the toys that I really actually got to know it as a property.
And the other thing I introduced you to is the music, because the music is good. The music
is great. Yeah, no, totally.
Anyone who doesn't know that, like, go find the songs. They're probably on YouTube. I've over the years downloaded all of them. They're hard to find, but people have ripped them. They're of course not streaming, but they are like good 80s songs. There are a bunch I wish were longer than a minute and a half, because they are good songs.
I'm surprised there isn't like an indie rock Brooklyn all-girl band that just goes out and just plays these songs as like a
I
Jem
would.
the Hologram
If I had
experience
any
at the
interest
Bowery
in singing
Ballroom. Yeah.
or doing drag, if I wanted, like this would that would be my shtick, because I agree completely. It surprises me there's not like a vinyl release of the songs. Like I don't understand why Jem's not more marketable. We can talk about it after our third segment, but I agree there should definitely be a band doing that. I would go see them.
Well, let's flip on the A side of this conversation, and it is Origins of the Story.
Truly outrageous, truly outrageous. Whoa, Jem, the music's contagious. Outrageous. Jem is my name, no one else is the same. Jem is my name.
And first up today is Jem and the Holograms, aka Just Jem. It is episodes 1 to 5 from Hasbro, Sunbow Productions, and Marvel Productions. These aired October 1985 to December 1985, and they are titled The Beginning, Disaster, Kimber's Rebellion, Frame Up, and The Battle of the Bands.
These are all written by Christy Marx. They're directed by Ray Lee, John Gibbs, and Terry Lennon, and lots of great voice actors who people would recognize from a lot of other things, but most importantly, the eponymous Jem, Samantha Newark, and Britta Phillips did her speaking voice. Samantha Newark and Britta Phillips did her singing voice.
Mm-hmm. And then Britta Phillips went on to be one of like the first ladies of indie rock as a member of the band Luna, and Dean and Britta, all very like Velvet Underground, like slow tempo songs. Don't sound at all like Jem, but she's had a huge music career after the fact.
Yeah, well, it's well deserved. I wonder if she covers any Jem songs that she
That's
sang
true. Oh my gosh.
decades ago.
And it said her father even played the keyboards on some of the songs too. So it was a family affair with the Phillips family.
This was your first time seeing the origin opening arc of Jem. Let's start with your reactions.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it a lot. I think it has, of course, some of the silliness that you see in a She-Ra or He-Man, but I think it actually is grounded, as you were saying, in a lot more reality around these characters and their plight to actually help the orphans, which we were kind of making fun of at top, actually gives it, I think, a grounding. And it's not just, oh, we want to be successful and have a pop music career. It's like, oh no, they have to do this for an actual specific reason. There's an altruism to it.
Yeah, and that adds the economic aspect, which becomes important. The other thing that I think grounds it in a real way is there's also ownership of the record company is an important part of the plot, because Jem's, for those who don't know the origin, Jerrica. So I guess if anyone's listening to this who has no idea who Jem is, I guess we should summarize what Jem is.
Yeah, that's true.
You've been very patient for the last 20 minutes. So Jerrica Benton is part of a musical band with her sister and her close friends, who are essentially her sisters also. And her father, who owned a record label, dies. She discovers that her father had created a hologram called Synergy that is meant to be what I think it's the ultimate audio visual synthesizer entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that Synergy, that he made Jerrica special earrings she can wear that are micro-projectors that allow her to construct holograms wherever she is. And she ends up deciding to take on the persona of Jem, a rock star who will lead the band of the holograms in the battle of the bands against the rival misfits to make money for all the reasons Rob is saying. And then, of course, more characters get introduced over the seasons and lots more hijinks.
And this is not
ensue.
The Glenn Danzig band from New Jersey, the Misfits, the horror punk band, but rather a equally kind of, the punky bad girls that play very similar music to Jem, but with a much worse attitude.
Yeah. They just like scream a little more. I mean, they wanted it all to be palatable, but like their songs are a little more like discordant.
Yeah, well, I was reading
like,
that when they were creating the Misfit songs, they wanted them to really just be synthetic, use synthesizers strictly, while the Jem songs could have some acoustic elements and be a little bit more organic.
Yeah,
that
and
was
she has
one of the
some
ways they
ballads and
separated
stuff.
them. Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we mentioned Rio earlier at the last plot point, which is a classic Superman love
Triangle.
is that Jerrica's boyfriend is Rio, and Rio does not know that Jerrica is also Jem. So, of course, you get potential flirtation. Does Rio like Jem more than Jerrica? And what is...
And Jerrica and her sister and the band are also taking care of orphans,
Yes, the
foster
Starlight
girls at the
Foundation.
Starlight House. Now, why the father spent all this millions of dollars building Synergy and not putting it directly into the orphanage, we'll never know.
Maybe his ultimate plan was that the holograms would take care of the orphans. They'd be the
Exactly.
parents
Oh,
to the
that's
orphans.
true. They
He was
could be
going to
the
make
parents to the-
hologram parents for all the
Oh,
orphans.
I love it. Oh, gosh. The reboot. I hear it.
Well,
what
only
did you...
if they keep Juliette Lewis in the role of Eric Raymond.
Yes. Now, you had watched these, of course, and you were into the Jem universe, but what did you think revisiting? Because this is like a 5-part origin story, basically, that we're getting here. So what did you think revisiting this?
I think two things stood out to me. One is probably both are reasons I would have loved it as a kid, but I think the animation is great. There are moments where you can tell they're rushing, but otherwise it's great hand-drawn cell animation, has the look of She-Ra and He-Man,
But much superior to that,
bright
where you
colors.
see the same frames often in He-Ra and He-Man and She-Ra. Here it was reminding me of G.I. Joe, which makes sense because it's the same company. Definitely seemed like a notch above those Filmation programs.
Yeah, but same like really good face work and character designs, and everyone looks great, and it's bright and colorful, and it moves, and there's a lot of action. So I love the animation a lot. I think they did an incredible job. The other thing I think is this show, even just recapping it right there, this show is so wildly, beautifully feminist. I mean, even thinking about Rio is such a nothing character. He's the band's assistant. He's like their roadie. He's not at all in a position of power. He barely has agency. Like they really just constructed like the what typically would have been a girl role in any other property and mapped Rio onto it. And that's really fun. Rio does end up saving Jem a lot, I noticed in the opening episodes.
There's a gargoyle. There's always something trying to fall on them, basically.
So that's fun. But even just it passes the Bechdel test with flying colors in a way that like She-Ra even barely does. I mean, they're really, it really has so many different characters, so many different women and strong female characters. Even in that opening, there's that one orphan who really doesn't want to participate in everything, goes over to the Misfits, wants to be a badass. And it's fun to just have these. I like that the Misfits are, Pizzazz is always pretty nasty. Sometimes they have to work together, but then you do have Stormer, who has a little bit more of like a regret and doesn't always want to be the bad girl. And I just think they're just nuanced, interesting characters. It's fun.
Yeah, like the truly evil character is the rival jealous record executive who's a man, Eric Raymond. The Misfits are more, they are more like the punks. They're more they're about anarchy. So they do some horrible, and I really hated them because they were so like, I was like, oh, they're really so awful. But you can kind of see where they're coming from. It's more just coming from like creating chaos. Well, he's like actually out to like murder people.
And set things on fire. And well, that's the other thing is like it's a slightly dark show for the 80s and for a toy line show. Like there is some dark violence to it. They're gonna fall off a cliff. The house gets burnt down. So it's fun to have a show that has that element too.
Well, and I can see so much of what you're saying about the feminism also in the new Barbie movie too. I think that's one thing. Maybe it's one of the things that you saw in that movie that reignited your love of Jem, because they do have that female first power there. And also I would think it's interesting because while both of them, both the Barbie movie and Jem, were basically created to help sell toys, they both also have this almost anti-capitalism streak running through them.
That's
because
true.
Jem and Jerrica, they're all kind of just doing it to help the orphans, and you see in Barbie too when they're really making it, the toys should be about empowering girls, not just about making money. Well, the movies are also ultimately like doing a capitalist deed as well. So they're kind of doing both things, but doing both things successfully, which is very rare.
Yeah. So I loved rewatching it. We actually watched more episodes than just these 5, but these were the 5 that are relevant to this conversation since they are her origin.
Well, let's flip the tape to the B side and start.
But I hear some bad girls coming.
Well, let's do quick. Let's explore multiversity.
All right, those misfits.
And today we are asking the question, what if Jem and the Holograms were heroes in the Hasbro multiverse alongside some very other familiar faces?
Oh, yeah, some weird ones.
This is from Hasbro, but published by Unit E. That's Unit -E.
The name is Unit E comic. Hasbro
Unit
published
E.
it.
Oh, but yes, it's called Unit E Comics. Comic, and is from October 2011, and it was a New York Comic-Con exclusive.
Yes, they then
Ooh.
did sell it in the HasLab toy shop online, but it was mostly distributed at New York Comic-Con. It was written by Andy Schmidt. Andy Schmidt had done some Marvel work, a good chunk of like a dozen issues or so as a writer and then editor, but then left to do IDW work, wrote Transformers, which is obviously a Hasbro. Left, though, shortly after this issue and runs Comics Experience, an online school for comics professionals. The art in this issue, and there are a lot of artists who are doing different segments of the issue, are Robert Atkins, Juan Castro, Simon Go, Marcello Mater, Nick Rungi, Peter Nguyen, David Finch, Livio Romandelli, Emiliano Santa Lucia, Chris Sotomayor, Ken Christensen, Art Adams, and Peter Steigerwald. And the issue is lettered by Dave Sharp. So a lot going on in these just 20-ish pages, 24 pages.
20 artists, basically, 20 pages. But
They're all doing like the different characters. So
Yes.
real quick summary of what's happening in here. A spaceship arrives. There's a teenager who's awoken by Biotron and Synergy. So Biotron is a character from the Micronauts. Synergy, of course, being Jem's Synergy. Synergy tells this teenager how Earth is special because they're going to find all these heroes that they need there. And she brings up a holographic display full of the beings across the multiverse that she's collected information on. So that's where we really see everybody, G.I. Joe, Transformers, etc. But she starts to go into some of them specifically and how they're going to help the mission, starting with Stretch Armstrong, Mask, M-A-S-K, 80s cartoon toy line, and then talks about another Earthling, a singer, Jerica, and he doesn't understand how she's going to help. At this point, she's only Jerica because Synergy talks about that she's going to become something bigger. She's going to help him, and she's going to compose the music of the spheres. Then she talks about the Action Man, other Micronauts, Princess Lolly from Candyland, the board game. The Primordia creatures, which are apparently Hasbro's attempts at rebranding the Inhumanoids, an 80s comic that we have talked about, based loosely, very loosely, on Lovecraft canon. And Synergy says that they have to reclaim their world from Baron Karza, who is a villain to the Micronauts. And these heroes are his only chance, and he then puts on the armor of Acroyear, another Micronaut. So it's a little Micronaut heavy with Synergy thrown in, and then just crazy bonkers characters showing up.
Yeah.
There is a concluding...
Oh, and the G.I. Joe, the Transformers, and Magic, we only get to see them a little bit. I guess they were so popular, they were like, okay, we don't need to remind anyone about.
Well, they had their own
properties.
run of comics at IDW, and while clearly they were allowed to do this issue, I wonder if there was some rights thing with featuring them as speaking characters. Now, before we dig into this, it closes with a letter from Andy Schmidt, where he talks about it being a little love letter to the varied brands that Hasbro has had the pleasure of ushering into the world, and that it's created to answer that age-old question, what if? In a way that we could really sink our teeth into. I mean, Princess Lolly in the same book as Battleship Galaxies, in the same book as Action Man, that's just insanity. And also a huge challenge and a lot of fun. I forgot that Battleship characters are in here, which I didn't know they made.
No, there are characters in Battleship,
but
yeah.
Sure. So he says, if you like it and want to see more or something like it, be sure to let us know. We hope you're excited by all the possibilities and potentialities from a project like this one. Now I wonder where Acro Year is off to. So I can talk a little bit more about what happens in the future after this issue. It never gets an immediate follow-up. But first, let's talk through the issue and our thoughts about it, and then I'll...
And it's good that you explained the plot, Guido, because people cannot just go on eBay and buy this if they're so intrigued by this. Your description.
I cannot believe it. And Jake and Jesus, if you're listening from Spec Tales, this is now... they're doing a new segment that they've just announced called White Whale or Whale Tail, which is like the grails that got away. This is going to be my whale tail because this issue is not for sale anywhere. I cannot find a sales history for it. It exists. And annoyingly, I was at that New York Comic Con. Of course, I've been to every one, and I don't have this issue, and I need it. I cannot find it, and I need it. So if anyone ever sees a Unit:E Hasbro New York Comic Con 2011 comic out there in the wild, please help me.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's not really a plot, right? So it's hard to talk about the plot here. Some of these characters I know of Mask. I didn't really know them. I've heard Stretch Armstrong. The one that really intrigued me was Action Man, because he kind of sounds like the Lee Falk Phantom, where he's a young
I thought
man.
He sounded like Doll Man.
Oh, well, here the concept, I guess, is that there's always an Action Man, and that they get all the knowledge of previous Action Men, but the Action Man just before this one turned evil. So now we've got like this 25-year-old with 125 years of like combat experience. So I was like, I've never heard of Action Man. I'm sure other people have certainly heard of him, but
He was
it was like, ooh, that sounds interesting.
From the 60s to the 80s.
Oh, okay. And he's got like guns and a sword, and which is very different, of course, than Jem, which as a property really didn't have much in that way. I mean, there's car chases and stuff, but no one's going around shooting people in Jem world. So I'm curious how they would have all come together in that.
Well, let's talk
way.
about that. I mean, and let's talk about Jem a little bit. I think what strikes me, what works for me in this issue and makes it really cool and doesn't, I mean, it's strange. It's very strange. You are trying to turn Candyland into something
Yes.
like with a deep mythology to it, which is cool. I'm all for, I fully support, but it just feels strange as you're reading it. But for Jem, synergy is such a central part of this, and that makes total sense. So that gives her, that's where her show was sci-fi-y, and her show maybe was a show those ignorant boys would leave on, as Christy Marx had talked about. So it's cool to me that the wraparound is being fueled by synergy, because otherwise it's totally Micronauts heavy. My guess is this was around the time that Hasbro was going to be rebooting the Micronauts. Micronauts, of course, are an odd thing. They're also a toy line, and Marvel originally printed them for quite some time. There's a Micronauts X-Men. We're going to cover Micronauts at some point, I'm sure. And they are getting reprinted by Marvel for the first time next year. It just got announced. But in this, it's cool that synergy is the catalyst. Synergy makes sense, and that means like Jem could have been treated as a true hero in this. Like she would have been a part of this. She wouldn't have been left out, which I think probably most people who are imagining a Hasbro universe are focused on, like G.I. Joe, Transformers, maybe Mask. But I think pulling in Candyland, Stretch Armstrong, and Jem is a pretty bold move.
Yeah. Well, and synergy is such a trope, not necessarily in a bad way, but something we've seen so many times that does bring all these people together and has this knowledge. She's reminding me of course, the sorceress in Masters of the Universe, but even like Jor-El in Superman world, and Zoran, right? Is that the Power Rangers big floating head, right? Like whenever there's like a big source of knowledge who's also kind of stuck in one place, which is also what all those characters have in common. But they're the one that like knows everything and is kind of acting as a supercomputer, the way that everything is connected. So I totally see that that's how they would be using synergy to bring all these people together.
Well, and what's cool about that, I mean, the examples you just gave of like the one who knows everything are older examples, but think about what synergy is doing here and the fact that it's 2011. So you and I have talked about how much multiversal storytelling has just exploded even since we started our show a little over 2 years ago. This is 12 years ago when no one, I mean, there was Marvel versus DC in the 90s, of course, super famous singular example. But beyond that, no one's doing a connected universe. The MCU has barely started. And yet here they are in Hasbro saying, what if we tried to connect our universe?
Yeah. So do you think this was a little too soon in that way?
I do.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. So the future, now to share like where this comic goes, the character of Acro Year, of course, continues. I don't know if it's the same teenager we meet in here or not, but since it's an existing Micronaut, he continues. And then the Unit E, which is, I realized also Unite, which is a cool thing.
Sure.
But
Exactly.
Unit E, but it's like Unity, Unite, and Unit-E. Unit-E shows up in a Transformers cartoon as like a random agency a few years after this, and then also a Beast Wars online comic a few years later. But has nothing to do with the multiverse as far as I could tell from looking at it. I'm not at all familiar with that world. So this never goes anywhere. And I don't know if the intention was for it to go somewhere meaty or if it truly was like a fun Hasbro ad teaser format. Or there have since been obviously other crossovers. Transformers and G.I. Joe have crossed over. The Micronauts and G.I. Joe and Transformers have crossed over. There have been a lot of ways Hasbro's world has connected, but Jem has actually never, ever been a part of it. Even in her 2015 relaunch, which is at IDW, which had the license to Transformers, to G.I. Joe, to all of the Hasbro comics. So I think it was probably too soon, or they never intended it, which might be, but I think it also probably was too soon. You know what? I just realized My Little Pony's missing from here, but maybe they didn't have any of the rights to
That's
that
true.
to show.
Yeah, I definitely think it was too soon, and now I wonder almost if it's too late in a way, because we've kind of
It would feel like they're copying everyone else at this point.
and we're on the other side of the interconnected universe wave, it seems like, where DC kind of half moving away from it and Marvel people kind of being upset with it in other property, I mean outside of comics, I guess. So I wonder if it's like, maybe they missed the boat here, although at the same time it's like it does totally make sense when you have one company that holds so much recognizable IP. Why aren't they maybe doing something together? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a distaste for it, at least on a Hollywood level, but I'm thinking about the current right now example where Mark Millar is releasing The Big Game, which is a miniseries that's putting all of his past series together. So Kick-Ass is now going to coexist in the world of Nemesis, which is coexisting in the recently created world of the Ambassadors and Nightclub. So there is, I think, a way to do it that is interesting. That's obviously one creator, but I could see this turning into a comic miniseries and people being a fan of it. I don't know where the rights for some of these things live. IDW is still publishing Transformers comics. I don't think they're publishing G.I. Joe, but I don't know. Oh no, we recently bought a G.I. Joe Snake Eyes and it was IDW. So they do still have that. Those are probably the only two that are coming out in comics though from this team. Like I said, Micronauts an unusual one because Marvel has a part of those rights in some fashion. Is now being reprinted. And ROM the Space Knight is the same deal. ROM is also a Hasbro Marvel thing. IDW did some comics for it. Marvel's now reprinting the old ones for the first time ever.
Well, and I think your Jem obsession, your new Jem obsession, all kind of started with Barbie too, and I think the success of that movie is certainly going to see some of these properties come, if not into comics, certainly into other forms as well. I don't think Hasbro would be sitting on these things. It's funny, you were just joking and saying like, oh wow, they're going to be trying to make a serious comic character out of Candyland, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Candyland movie. And actually, I was looking it up. There was going to be a Candyland movie about 10 years ago with Adam Sandler, and that one fell through. But I'm sure they're going to pick that back up. And I think even characters that are a little less known, like Mask, like Action Man, hey, if they own them, I bet they're developing them. Whether we'll see them...
Right. Well, it
that's
reminds
another
me
story.
of the Mattel announcement after Barbie, that the fact that they had like Uno in development and they have all
Yes.
these other things that you just can't quite imagine what it's going to be.
Well, yeah.
But it could end up being awesome. I mean,
And Crayola is starting to develop stuff, based on their crayons? Okay, sure.
but I mean, as we saw with Barbie, it can be done.
Yes, it
and
can.
It can be
Yes.
done in an interesting and original way. I haven't seen the modern Jumanjis, but maybe they're good, and that's. Although Jumanji didn't start as an actual board game.
No, that was a
fictional
book
board
first.
game.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
So anyway, so do you want to go back to this Earth Unity? We'll call it Earth Unity.
Yeah, I mean, I do, because I think there were so many possibilities that we just didn't get to see here because this was so short. This really is just a preview book. Like, we don't really fully know what's going on with our main character. We're introduced to all these other characters. So yeah, I would love to see how they're actually going to connect who truly is the villain and what that villain's plan is. So yeah, I'd love to kind of go back to this world.
Yeah, I would love it too. And I think it has the potential for someone like me to do what I think a really good story and a good crossover does, which is it gets me into something else. So as someone who is just like a big fan, geek nerd who loves worlds and world building, like I would get into this because of Jem, but maybe I'd come out of it appreciating the Micronauts or Transformers even, or G.I. Joe even, in a way that I don't step into those worlds. So this would sort of get you into that. So that's where it would be really successful, I think.
I'd be curious if Andy Schmidt wrote like a series Bible to anticipate what might have come before. So even if those comics weren't there, I'd love to see if there was somehow he was able to leak it. Oh, here's what the plan was, or can we make this into like a prose version instead, or something like that? Because I kind of think if you're starting this out here, you must know where it's going to go, especially someone who's worked in comics like he has. So I'd be curious. Oh, hey Andy, let's see what you were planning.
All right, you'll have to reach out to him.
Well, let's do our final closing track, our encore. It's Pondering Possibilities.
Music's contagious, outrageous. Jem is my name, no one else is the same. Jem is my name.
So, Guido, what are we talking about for our Pondering Possibilities?
Well, we are talking about the 2015 IDW Comics launch. I mentioned it in the opening, and it ran for 3 years, over 40 issues. So pretty successful ongoing run. And we are going to just take a look at the first issue so you can see the most recent interpretation of Jem that's out there.
Yeah, so this is Jem and the Holograms from IDW Comics, issue 1 from March 2015, and it's entitled Showtime Part 1.
It's written by Kelly Thompson, art and co-created story also by Sophie Campbell, colors by Victoria Robato, and letters by Sean Lee. So it's only the first part of what is a 6-part arc, but it gives you the full origin at least. So thoughts about the origin, thoughts about the new interpretation.
It just reminded me so much of other comics that we've read. I think Thundercats comes to mind, and probably Archie as well, where you're taking a property that was definitely intended for children and you're not fundamentally changing it, but you're adding more nuance onto it. You're adding more motivation to the characters, but you're not changing the fundamental DNA of what it is. So I thought in that way, Kelly Thompson did a really good job, and Sophie Campbell did a really good job of like, okay, we're not going to destroy what Jem is, but we're going to make Jem something that, something that's a little more than for just children.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that totally. And now I read this when it came out, and I only ended up staying with it for a few issues, in part because, and I know you agree, the art is just not for me. I have no problem with it. I don't think it's bad art, but it is not stylistically the way that I can really engage a book. So that was really a turnoff for me. But otherwise, I appreciated that adultification that you're talking about. It's not really even adultification. It's more like a complication. They're just adding so much complexity within the characters. And
Yeah.
so
Well, like the
I
biggest thing
enjoyed
here
that.
is that we have Jerica, and she as our lead singer before she discovers Synergy, and she doesn't, and Jerica just has stage fright, like she's trapped in her shell, and I think that gives depth as to why she needs to become Jem, and that's not something we ever get on the TV series. She just kind of wants to become Jem because, I don't know, it's fun. And when she's doing all this thing to hide her identity, but we never really know why she needs to do it. And here she's like, well, now I can become Jem, and like no one's gonna know it's me, and I can sing out and be fearless in that way. And it's like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it's very drag. There are a lot of
Totally.
aspects of this story. Not just this comic, I'd say even watching the show and stuff, but definitely in this comic, I think it's brought forward the way it's about drag, and it's about playing with identity and playing with presentation of identity, and that's cool. And it evolves. There are lots of, I think, cool moments in the issues that I've read of this series that hit on these deeper questions. So
Yeah,
I think
and
that's
we don't have the foster house here, which, as we said, I think adds a lot of depth to the TV series, but also you're wondering, okay, why are these three, I don't know, 18, 20-year-olds running this foster house all
it might be
together?
less realistic. Yeah. Well, I
even little things like the fact that their secret hideout on the TV series is in this drive-in, very like Fortress of Solitude here. Here, the secret hideout is at her house, so it's like, okay,
Behind
that
a
also
jukebox.
makes
Yeah,
behind a
which is
jukebox,
fun.
so it's tied
Yeah.
to music. Why is it a movie theater, which has nothing to do with music in the TV series? So
Well,
yeah,
my guess is it's because it would be abandoned, right? In the 80s, no one
Yes.
was going to
Oh, I
drive
guess
in,
that's
so
true.
It was an
Yeah, yeah.
abandoned place. But what I like, though, and Kelly Thompson talks a little bit about this in her intro to the first trade paperback about who this is for and trying to bridge something and not have it just be nostalgia. It's a cool intro that she writes, and I'm a huge fan of hers. But I like that even though she makes those changes to the scene, she is clearly such a fan because she uses verbatim some of the language. Like
Yes,
she has
yeah.
Synergy say, like, I am meant to, your father constructed me to be the ultimate audio visual synthesizer entertainment, right? Like there's so many language and moments in it that I'm like, having just watched the cartoon, I'm like, oh my god, she was doing that exactly, even though she was transposing it, even though it's modern times, even though she's changing some of the details and changing some of the characterizations. All of what you love is still there. So I think that's a really well executed reboot.
Yeah, I would have loved to seen too with, I know some comics are doing this now. I would have loved for them to put out some music
Oh my
to go
god, I
along
know,
with the
'cause she
comics.
wrote great lyrics.
Yeah.
Every issue she has like written a few lyrics on the page that it shows them as if they're singing. And in this one, you know, Jerica is singing this song to herself before she meets Synergy. So I agree. It would have been so cool if they had hired someone to write actual music and then produce it.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get AI to do it now. We can get Synergy to
like
make
Synergy,
music.
exactly. Well, maybe someone will. There's so many lost possibilities here. There's Andy's script and Kelly's songs. Maybe we'll all still. There's still possibility we'll see it somewhere in the new Hasbro verse.
Well, before we move on, I do want to talk about what is the possibility of Jem. Do you think it's going to come back, and in what form do you think it's going to come back in, and do you think it's going to be a reboot? Do you think it's positioned for a requel like Masters of the Universe Revelation is? What do you think about the future of Jem, and why haven't we seen it in 6 years?
And we should point out too that in 2015 there was also a live action film.
Yes, which neither of us have seen,
Neither of us have
and
seen,
is
so we're not
apparently
covering
really
it.
not like the core of the story that it should be. But I'm willing to see it and judging it separately. But
Well, I think everything these days it's all about 4-quadrant, hit up the consumer on all these different ways, and I think Jem is actually perfect for that because you've got a comic or you've got a TV show, you've got the toys, and then you've got the music, which I think is such a big thing that was never, the music I think is the one part that was never really fully exploited even back then, because the songs were a minute and a half and it's for kids and it's a cassette tape. But like now I think it would be so cool if they really made it like, okay, maybe you even lead with the album first and then make a comic that goes along with the album or something like that, or like what shows like Nashville or Riverdale did, where they're really integrating songs into a TV show in that way and also releasing that music, and you're making money that way too. Like that's where I think like a future of Jem could really be.
yeah. Do you think it'll be animated or live action, and do you think it'll be TV or movie, or which do you want it to be? I mean,
Oh, I don't know. Not having seen the live action movie, it's hard to say, but I think a TV show actually would make a lot of sense because you can incorporate the different songs into it and
Animated
do
or
different
live?
styles. I don't know.
I'd love animated. Animation's never gone away. I don't think we're in like a golden age, but I just think there's so many recent examples of really good animation for adult, for kids, or for both. And obviously He-Man, the She-Ra reboot is
Yeah,
great
that
and
comes
is
to
in my
mind.
mind. But the He-Man, not reboot, the He-Man continuation is just such a good example where it looks enough like the original, but it's modern. And so I think I'd love to see Jem animated.
I think you'd have to go back and tell the story again, because I don't think it's a property like Masters of the Universe that people kind of know. What do you think? Do you think it could be continuing like the new He-Man show, or like She-Ra, you'd have to kind of go back and retell the origin?
I don't know. It's a good question. I'm not even sold that She-Ra had to be rebooted. I appreciated the reboot. You and I enjoyed it a lot. We never ended up finishing it, but we enjoyed what we watched quite a bit. So I don't know, because I think the right person can probably tell that story and make it really accessible to new people. I agree it needs to be accessible to new people. I don't think there is the largest Jem fan base out there. There was a reboot, if you will, of the dolls by a company starting in 2015 or 2012. For a few years, they did these really high-end fashion dolls that sadly I missed out on and are now literally $500 to $1,000 each. Because they just made them in small print runs, and they're not meant to be toys. They're meant to be like collectibles. But that's it. I mean, Super 7 has done like the little reaction one and stuff. So I just don't know how big the Jem world is to know. But I'd like it to be a continuation, even if someone finds a way in that continuation to sort of retell the origin so that people can watch it. I'd love a continuation. And I'd love, Christy Marx said this in one of the interviews we listened to, I'd love it to be in the 80s.
Yeah. We'll
There's a lot of
see.
fun you could have there. Yeah, I'm sure we'll see Jem again in our life, but I just don't know when or where or how. I'd say one warning to anyone listening who's a Jem creator. I don't think it would work well to make it about being an influencer. which I suspect is what that movie was like a proto-influencer, and feels like what Jem should be updated to be. But that's not why people like the story of Jem, and it also makes it more time bound. So I think that's one thing Kelly Thompson does really well, in that social media exists, modern media exists, but the story is still about Jem and this band and their singing, and it feels very analog. Like it's not about like becoming YouTube stars or TikTok stars.
And you've got Olivia Rodrigo and Billie Eilish, like the whole new generation of female songwriter in almost a little bit of the Jem vein in that way. Different genres of music, but going back to that. So I feel like it could be back again. Okay, well, that our tape has hit the end. Our needle has skipped. I don't know, whatever there, but that is a wrap. And there is no giveaway this week. But if you are looking for our active giveaway, we highly recommend you listen to the last few episodes.
And I have been Pizzazz, aka Guido the Misfit.
Then now I forget what it was. The always amazing Rob. I don't remember her theme song. Truly outrageous Rob. Aha. And the reading
follow
list
us on all social media at Dear Watchers.
Yes, and the reading list is in our show notes. And leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
In the meantime, in the words of Guachu, keep pondering the possibilities.